Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the glorious mess of building your own business with the people doing it. I'm your host and fellow business builder, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into some good, honest, small business chat. There's no doubting that the experience of building your own business changes you. But there are some businesses that really are built to change the world too. And the business you're about to hear the journey of is absolutely one of them. Melissa, who you'll meet in a sec, is building Violet, a company that is transforming the last stage of life by enabling us all to be a little better prepared for the experience of it, for ourselves and for our loved ones. I've been a little obsessed with this business ever since I first came across it. Shout out to Odette Barry for putting us in touch. I genuinely believe it is something I just want to see grow into a household name and just see the positive impact that it can bring to all of us. And because as you'll hear, the human behind it is super hardworking, passionate, and so committed to the personal growth that comes alongside building a business. You will hard relate to Melissa, and you will also fall in love with how important her business is. So to ensure that you have the time to take in every single minute of this valuable story, I've actually split this chat into two parts for you because I get it, business builders, we might not have the space for a 1-hour episode. So maybe 2 30-minute episodes will be a little bit more viable for you to fit in between all of the tasks I know you have going on. They're both available now for you, so there's no waiting in between. I wouldn't do that to you. But in this part 1 of my chat, which has so much richness for you, you're going to hear about pivoting from one business to another, the pressures of creating a new concept and product, the experience of raising capital, approaches to risk, finding meaning in business, and the all-important signals we need to look out for. Now, we do briefly touch on Melissa's personal experience of grief in this conversation. So if you don't feel up for that today for any reason at all, that is perfectly fine. I just wanted to flag it with you up front so that you have the opportunity to dip out if that is what feels right for you. But if you're ready for some seriously inspiring insights into the building of a fellow business and a very important business at that, and all the glorious chaos that comes with it, let's get into part 1 of the chat. With me to share her business building story is Melissa Reader, founder and CEO of Violet, the company transforming the last stage of life. Violet is a virtual care platform supporting people to talk about, plan for, and manage the last stage of life, helping with practical and emotional needs from early preparations to living with grief, aiming to make this time as good as possible for everyone involved. Violet combines humanity and technology to help people navigate this complex stage of life, using evidence from around the world to guide their work. Their national network of Violet Guides has been helping individuals, families, caregivers, and the bereaved for decades. They have personal experience and expert training, providing support programs nationwide that are measured by a strong impact framework. On their platform, you will find a seamless, guided journey with help from an emotionally intelligent assistant named Violet, who is available anytime to answer questions. This is such an impactful and necessary offering, bringing light and consideration to a topic that is often avoided by so many until it's needed. Featured in the Australian Mamamia Smart Company and loads more. It truly is business and tech for good, and I can't wait to hear about the journey it's taking you on. Melissa, welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me, and thank you for such a lovely introduction.
It really is just such a brilliant business. I have had the pleasure of chatting with you before about this business and just engaging with the platform. I think we hear a lot about this kind of like trends and movement in the end of life stage. And I think that is just such an important thing because we don't want to find ourselves in those sticky moments looking for support and not knowing where to go. Like, this is just a service I wish everybody just knew about and engaged with before they had to.
Yeah, it's really funny, isn't it? Because it's really the one thing that we all genuinely have in common.
Yeah.
But it's just something that we find so difficult to accept and to talk about. And often I just draw that parallel. If we were sitting here 10 years ago, we might be talking about mental health and really struggling to find the right words, to know how to have the right conversation. We didn't have any social norms, and we certainly didn't have a service ecosystem. So that's really what we're trying to do here, is to kind of spearhead all of those things for this whole life stage which is something we're going to have to manage so many times for the people we love and care for and for ourselves.
Absolutely. So, yes, I'm of course going to have links to Violet and all of your resources in the show notes. But before I send the listener there is so much to hear about your story, how you've ended up here, how you've ended up creating this important business, and the you behind all of that, which is often best described by somebody who's not you. So I will ask you, how do you think your best friend might describe you?
Good question. Okay, I'm channeling my best friend Lucy here, who was my sister in primary school and now lives in Europe. And she would say that I am very determined, sometimes to the point of my own detriment, that I too often have my work voice on. She would just say, hey, it's me. Can you just dim down the work voice? Remember? So I do have a bit of a default. My husband tells me that too. I like to think I have had people tell me that I can be relatable around tough topics, and I am leaning into some of the hardest things that I've had to face in my life to try and make those same things a little bit easier for others. And as we'll probably go into in a bit of my backstory, just like always learning, always growing. I think the last decade, my gosh, I have grown and changed a lot in that decade. No doubt as a result of life experience and this work and a whole lot of other things.
I say it often, you cannot separate the personal growth that comes through the art and chaos of entrepreneurship. It really does change us from the inside out. But I would love to get into your backstory and about how some of this personal growth and how you got here with Violet. So before Violet was your world, your passion and your vision here, who were you? What were you doing?
Very typical middle-class upbringing in the northwestern suburbs of Sydney. What's that middle-class bogan show? Like that was us, right? Very much. My parents had news agencies. We did a lot of work in there, small businesses. I kind of had a few fairly wild years coming out of high school. Ended up at university, blah, 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 and then started to do a couple of things around progressing my career in consulting. So I started and I ran a couple of agencies in Sydney, and one of those was with my first husband, Mauro. So I met this beautiful man from Italy. We met in some terribly dingy nightclub in Darlinghurst in the late 90s, but that's a whole other story for a whole other podcast. Anyway, we were running these businesses together and, like starting small, but getting some really great traction, getting some awards, getting quite a boutique positioning. And then suddenly we realized we had 3 little kids. Like, how did that happen? That all happened in a space of about 6 or 7 years, but, such beautiful little humans. And totally by surprise, I thought Mauro was putting on weight. Like his belly just looked not right to me. And I did that thing that wives do. Come on, you need to go to the doctor and get that checked out. And it took about 3 or 4 months to get in there. But what they found was a tumour in his kidney. And actually the kind of weird wobbly state of his belly was what they call ascites. It's like the body's fluid response to quite advanced cancer. So that all happened very quickly, and our youngest was only 9 months when he had this diagnosis, and the tumour on its own was tiny, but it was in a number of other places. So it was, metastasised on diagnosis, and it was just such a god-awful shock. So that, that experience of going through that with him, of caring for him, of trying to figure that all out, and just realizing how many things in that experience need to be better and should be better and could be better but aren't today. Whether you're someone like Mauro who is faced with a terminal illness or whether you're an elderly, frail person coming to the end of a well-lived life, these last couple of years of our human life that we all have in common, we're so avoidant and we don't talk about them, we don't plan for them, and they end up being a real kind of tumbleweed of disorganisation and distress and overwhelm. And I just think it's time that we did a better job of that life stage. So coming out of that experience with Mauro, where I saw him go through so many treatments that he wouldn't never have had, really, if we were thinking clearly, and so many missed opportunities to talk honestly, and so much time spent in hospital away from us. He died in hospital. We didn't even have a will in place. Like, how do you do that? How do you actually get to that position where you've got one of your partner terminally ill, you've got kids, you've got a business, you've got property, and you don't actually have a will? It's really silly. And it was really hard after his death in those couple of years to get through and tidy all that up. And in fact, I was just talking to somebody about this morning. It was very mixed emotions because you've got all of that expected grief and loss. But I also felt a bit angry and I felt quite abandoned. Like, how we should have done that better, right? We should have worked that out so I was a bit better equipped for then taking on the sole job of managing everything. So a couple of years after his death, I did this amazing program called Social Leadership Australia, which started to introduce me to these concepts around adaptive leadership. And we might go a bit deeper on that later in the chat. Really, really profoundly important to me. And at the end of that program, I noticed this little micro charity called Life Circle who were looking for a new board member, and they were doing non-clinical work through the last stage of life. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I can see why that would be important. So I joined the board and could see there was a lot of value in what this organisation was trying to do, but they didn't have any scalability or sustainability built into their model. So long story short, it was my first board role. It was an incredible privilege to work with a great group of directors, but also to decide to wind that company down and to really go deep on the IP, figure out what was important and rebuild it with a national strategy to create something like Beyond Blue or Lifeline, an organisation that had a national role to play for the last stage of life. We found our first early funders, and then we were kind of on a 3-year journey then, growing. We changed names at that point to Violet, and then over the next 3 years, we built this incredible network of volunteer guides, and that not-for-profit has helped about 20,000 people. So really proud of the role that organisation will continue to play. But I got a lot of interest from businesses, health insurers, life insurers, aged care providers, even one of the big banks that had no solution in this space of how to support their customers, their members, and in fact their employees, their team members. And so we secured about $1 million of B2B revenue quite quickly. And that was just a really important signal to me that there was a bigger opportunity here and one that I couldn't address as a not-for-profit. I could never access capital, and you also get a tiny bit typecast as a not-for-profit. So that led us last year to spin out a separate technology company. We were invited into Techstars. Amazing. That really helped us to shape up our proposition, do all our discovery work and build our MVP. And here we are. We're now kind of actively selling, actively raising, and we've got a really big global ambition for this business.
Well, I think your share, first and foremost, around the experience with your husband was such a generous one. I am sure in your line of work, it is something that you have had to touch on a number of times in a number of forums, and so therefore are able to so articulately demonstrate such what I can just hear is a deeply emotional impact, and one that I'm sure I've been affected by just hearing, and I'm sure the listener will too. What a generous share with the world to let people into your experience in that way, and what a challenging experience that must have been for you. I really took away from what you shared there that sense of anger, and can almost imagine how that has channeled your focus a little bit into being like, this can't happen for me, this can't happen for other people. There's so much unfairness in the story that you just shared. It is, it's hard to move past that into, how did you build your business? Because I'm so deeply affected by that story. Because just wow, it's so incredibly impactful and so awful.
And I often think, is it okay to share Maro's story? But I've kind of reconciled that, yes, it is. It has to be. I feel pretty confident that he would be okay with that, because really that fuels all of the change work that I want to do. But when I say I was angry at myself as much as I was angry at him. I was like, these things are so obvious in hindsight, but when you're in the just ocean of turmoil, you're just managing the 8 hours ahead of you. You can't really get beyond it. But, as hard as it was, it in so many strange ways has been this incredible gift too, because it has really changed who I am. I'm a very different person. I am much more courageous. I have a much higher risk tolerance because I have seen how quickly life can change. And so it just allows me to live much more fully. I think I parent differently as well because of that. So in that weird way, it's been a precious gift. I would be a different person without that experience, no doubt. I mean, so many people would say that when you've gone through something really significant like that.
That is the absolute beauty in the sharing of stories and experience and in what comes next from, not every story is made for sharing, but some like yours are so potentially impactful for so many people that it is, hugely necessary. And, that's so much of why this show exists is the stories that we don't get to hear, like the person who's been with me on this journey for some time listening will know that I tend to ask some awkward questions about money, and I tend to ask them awkward questions about, but how did you actually do that? Like, sorry, am I missing something? Is there a privileged background here that I'm missing? Because I need to hear these stories, because it's so much of that then you start to be able to place everything in much more context. And, I think that risk tolerance is such an interesting piece, because when growing something like Violet, I look at it from the outside and just think, wow, what's happening in the inner there? Like, that looks so big, and it looks so, like even seeking investment and then, spinning off into commercial and being able to have those two hats on. Like, it does take such an incredible tolerance for risk that is potentially not innate in so many of us. So I think that alone is such a powerful share. And even just by hearing your story, then, it's like, okay, how can we apply then a little bit more risk tolerance to our own world? So, perhaps if we don't have that experience to leverage from, because what a challenging experience to leverage from, but what elements of risk tolerance do we all need to impact into our worlds a little bit?
Ambiguity is a really difficult thing, isn't it? For different people have very different thresholds. So I've seen in a lot of people that I've worked with over the last couple of years, ambiguity is really unsettling for a lot of people. It's de-energizing, it's destabilizing. I completely get that. It's the total opposite for me. I really thrive in that. You would never hire me as your BAU CEO. I wouldn't last a week, but I need to be tempered as well. So, my co-founder, Tom, is a great yin and yang to my risk tolerance, because he has a different level of risk tolerance and he can kind of talk me down. Sometimes I need that. And then sometimes I can talk him up. So, I think you do need it to be balanced and measured, but undoubtedly in the world of entrepreneurship and startup, you've got to have an appetite for it, because it's going to come at you every day, especially if you're developing a new product in market that doesn't really exist today. You've got to explain what that is in every conversation. You've got to explain to businesses how it fits within their business, and that just takes a fair bit of stamina. Anyway, I think that they're all kind of parts of the recipe of entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. You've given me a couple of nice reminders there, but first of all, ambiguity as destabilizing, just, oh, wow. Like, yes, I think so. I can relate to that so deeply when you don't know what's coming ahead, or you don't know exactly what the most important thing is to put your focus on, exactly what's going to lead to what you need to have, what you don't need to have. Like, yes, absolutely. Could not agree more about learning to understand how to live in ambiguity is like the bane of my existence. But at that stage, getting to here, of course, you had your consulting business, you had that work that you were doing with your husband, and you had that kind of happening, and then a transition phase into where you've ended up now. So take me on a little bit of that journey to moving away from that consulting business and perhaps meeting your co-founder and getting into this space and what came next from there.
Gosh. I'll try and kind of condense that because it's quite a long story. But the consulting work that I did evolved over a couple of years, because Mauro, my husband, was a really talented designer. And so he was, like, if you think of typical Adland, I was the suit and he was the creative. That was our kind of partnership Didn't always work perfectly, but most times we got it pretty right. But I just didn't want to stay in that role. I found myself in a lot of board meetings and I had real opinions on some of the strategic opportunities and the things I could see in that business, but I was their brand consultant. So I just had a Pantone swatch to talk to about the colour of their logo. And that really bore the shit out of me quite quickly, frankly. So I started to get into purpose-led strategy, building purposeful brands. A bit early in the market for that over here. There was about 2% of the market was interested in even having that conversation. And if I had been able to, I probably should have gone to the US and, worked with BCG or kind of cut my teeth in one of those big consulting agencies where purpose-led work was much more prevalent. But that wasn't possible, obviously, with three little ones. But I developed a consulting offer that kind of brought that together with some of the tenets of adaptive leadership and all that kind of early work around human-centered design. And it was a really kind of interesting mix, very much around creative problem solving and then business strategy and brand strategy. And there was a couple of really important moments that I remember that helped me take those big steps forward. And one of them was probably in the first 6 or 8 months after Mauro had died, because I had to keep this business going. I had staff to pay. It was our sole source of income. So what I couldn't have was people saying, oh, don't send work to them because they've just gone through this horrible crisis. I had to be quite convincing that everything was going okay and you should definitely still send work our way. We're going to do a great job. Even though the inner version of that was like turmoil. But anyway, I got very good at building a facade which had some negative consequences, which I'll come back to. But professionally, that was just a total necessary play. And I remember being in a focus group one night on a Tuesday night at my office. I was paying a nanny to be with my kids. And I'm in a focus group with a pasta company interviewing 12 people around whether they wanted green or cream on the vegetarian pack. And it was just one of those moments that has stayed with me. It's like, I'm not going to be away from my kids doing this kind of work that is frankly meaningless to me. So it gave me some of those big courage injections to say, no, there's some change afoot here and I've got to step into some different spaces. And I'm really, really glad I did. I have to, in all honesty, there was a good 3 or 4 years where I was doing a half-assed job of a mess of all sorts of stuff. So I was trying to run my consulting business. I was stepping into this charity. I stepped into an operational role with the charity and I was just doing a bunch of things not particularly well. So then that forced me to a decision, am I going to really pursue this work around the last stage of life or am I going to continue with my consulting offer? And I chose what was purposeful work for me. A big, scary decision at the time, but so glad I did. In fact, what a privilege to even have that choice. Massive privilege. But I'm really glad I made the decision I did.
The courage injections is a term I just love so much because they come at random moments, don't they, where you have none and for a really long time and then all of a sudden one thing will happen. It will be just the thing that you need to push forward. But I think so often we think it's one big moment and then that's enough energy to push you forward. But I think certainly what I found and what I'm hearing in your story is it's kind of like a big one. It's something that stands out in the memory and then it's just a series of little ones that keep pushing you through what can be years long of the messy middle from going from A to B, whether that be leaving a corporate career into going out on your own to do something, or whether that be stepping out of one business and making your moves into another. I think that phase is where, I've found myself so many times, I might even be in one, I'm unsure, who knows? You just never can really tell when you're in the middle of it. But so many people I get to speak to with this podcast and listeners who connect with me find themselves in the middle of this where we're so desperate for clarity about what the next thing's going to be, but it just doesn't ever really come. It's kind of a culmination of little injections, little step forwards. But I do imagine that meeting establishing this relationship with a co-founder might have been another one of those little moments that kind of gave you a little bit of momentum to in that next phase. What was that experience like?
Completely. I think, there are little steps and there are important signals and you've really got to have your eyes open and pay attention to those signals, I think, because they might not be what you're expecting. They might, change your narrative or they might pivot your thinking. There's a whole range of things, but steps and signals are really part of that. So Tom Hull and I met like a decade ago. He was on the capital raising side at that stage, and we knew each other because his organisation had given some support to the charity that I was involved in. And I just always admired him as a person. I thought he had a lot of integrity, a lot of charm, like just one of those people that can step into a conversation and make you feel really well held, like you've known them for a long time. But he also always brings the hardest questions, always calls bullshit, always asks the hardest questions. And that's really important, I think, in a co-founder relationship. There's no point you both kind of seducing each other with this wild opportunity. You've got to have that tempering, measuring. So as I was seeing, back in the not-for-profit, thinking I might spin out this separate company, I basically just called Tom up out of the blue one day. We had a chat and I said, look, I don't know where you're at or what you're up to, but I'd just like you to have to think about this because I think there's something interesting here. And I knew that he was always interested in purposeful work. And we talked for a couple of months. And after that period, he decided to come over. So that was brilliant.
And what's been happening since then? Bit of a loaded question because, of course, we talked very briefly about your experience in going to market and raising capital to be able to continue this important work. So I'm interested in, I guess, some of the what's next, how you started to make a plan for what would be getting this into people's awareness, this incredibly important business into people's awareness and growing it.
Yeah, the first really important catalyst was the Techstars Accelerator. So I just didn't know that was the right thing for us. It felt like a bit of a stretch, but I spent some time with the MD, Kirsten Hunter, and she's brilliant. And she got me. She understood what we were trying to build, and I really appreciated her views on business for good. We were very aligned on that. So we threw our hat in the ring and we got in, and that's a really competitive process. So again, signals, signs, it's like, wow, 500 companies and 12 got through and we were one of them. So that's pretty awesome.
What was the process like? What sort of assets did you have to build? What did you have to pull together for that?
Oh, you had to do a written application, you had to do a pitch video, and you had to share some of your early product. So you had to give the committee a sense of what you wanted to build and where you were on that build journey. And then there was a whole range of screening committees and yada, yada, yada. And then Kirsten brought each of the 12 companies together for what she called just a few last questions and just told us all immediately, you got in, and then just filmed all of our reactions. We're like, okay, now the questions that might get asked, you take this, I'll take that. So we show up like good students, all prepared, and she just goes, well, hi guys, I just wanted to let you know you got in.
I both love that and would also have been so angry in that moment, being like, do you know what kind of pressure I have put on myself?
I read the anger there, and that was just, wow, we got in.
Amazing.
Because they also, Techstars take a small stake in the company as part of that, so you get some pre-seed funding. So just that 12-week process, really intense, but great structure, really got us working hard on the strategy, the business strategy, the product strategy, all the customer discovery work that we had to do, and building our first minimum viable product. At the end, there's this thing called Demo Day at the end of the 12 weeks where you pitch to investors, so you're kind of always working in service of the goals for Demo Day.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's insightful to understand a little bit more about how these work. I think, when we start to move in these circles and have conversations about entrepreneurship and about startups, from small to large, these terms get thrown around so much. Techstars or like crowdfunding, like there's so many random things that seem to happen into the abyss. And I think the explanation of the dark arts of what's out there and what's involved, needs a little bit more light on it, because I think, so it could be a logical option for so many people, but just the awareness of it is just not there.
That's right. And then, of course, if you ever didn't get that glossary right, they'd just reinvent the next 50 terms because it's just constantly changing and shifting. But yeah, there is a bit of a dark world, isn't there? Like, what's an accelerator? What do you actually achieve and deliver? And not all accelerators are the same, of course. But yeah, gosh, we had a great experience. It just allowed us to really shake off the skin of the not-for-profit and move into a much more commercial space, and great mentors and advisors, some of whom stayed on the journey with us and might become our first hires once we've closed our round. So it's super exciting.
As I said up front to you, listener, this one was a bit of a long chat, and I think you can see why now it was a long chat and why I wanted to ensure that I can capture it all for you so it fits within your schedule of listening. So that was part 1 of my chat with Melissa, with so much more richness and incredible insight to come. So if you're ready now, head over to part 2, which is in the feed for you already, for the rest of this impactful story of business building, or come back another time if it suits you best, because you absolutely do not want to miss all the incredible insights that Melissa has for you in this next section. So I will see you there.